Business of sports, and we are joined by a longtime player agent, Ritch Winter, joins us again. Ritch, how you doing, my man?
It's good. Today I came in the sunlight. It was awesome. It feels like spring out there.
Oh,
not feels like spring, but it
not
start looking like spring.
This is the last day of the cold, buddy. Tomorrow you could come in. If we were doing the show tomorrow, you'd probably wear a muscle shirt.
Shorts and flip-flops next week.
Yeah. Oh, like seriously, when you go from minus 25 for a month and all of a sudden it's going to be minus 3, but it looks like we'll be in the pluses by the weekend.
Yeah, maybe up to double plus. Double figures.
It's going to be crazy. The big news in the sports world as an agent, and you've talked about it, and it's your words where you said, hey, the easiest part of my job was a lot of times negotiating for my star players' contracts, because those ones were easy. Now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, today parted ways with his agent. He's close to getting a max deal. He wants it. The team wants it. Like, it's the max deals there. They're pretty much set out. Like, there's not a lot the agent does per se to get more money, right? It's kind of very similar. Now, some say, geez, this is kind of cheap from him to do that. It takes away the money from his agent, yada, yada. I don't know about it. But if you're the agent, obviously, I guess, you're losing some money in that point. But to me, there has to be something more to this. It wouldn't because the negotiation and the talk with your client, it's not like in the February, you've never had this conversation about what your potential next deal is going to be like.
Yeah, it's so hard to know what's going on behind the scenes, but look, at the end of the day, I got to tell you, I remember years ago, it's hard to believe, 15 to 20 years ago, I forget the exact time frame, but Dom Hasek was making $11 million back then.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with Dom back then he had a little plastic TD Bank checkbook. He opened up the checkbook and he wrote out a check. He asked me how to spell 440,000, because that was a 4% fee on $11 million. And I'm sitting there in the kitchen, wondering when the question's coming.
So you get paid up front as the agent?
No, that was just the middle of the season when I just happened to be visiting. He received his invoice. We usually bill in the middle of the season, which allows the players to pay half late, half early, and that's.
But so do you pay per year? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you charge them per year. It's not.
Yeah. And usually what happens is if a player gets a signing bonus, that's why all the signing bonuses come on July 1st, right?
Right.
Because agents can bill right on the signing bonus, so we all like that because we have to pay our own bills, right? And then at the end of the day, then we usually will bill in the middle of the season and players will pay and we used to have a built-in accelerator because our fees used to be tax deductible in the US. So they would like to get them paid just prior to December 31st. So that I always went home at Christmas with all kinds of extra money, a lot of excitement. Kids always seemed to be quite pleased that we spent a little more than we would have otherwise have, because the coffers were always full back then. But in this situation, I mean, it's hard to say, but it's, so reflecting on Dom, I just really appreciated, here's a guy that I met in the Czech Republic. I can see the day I met him driving up in an old beat up green Skoda, which I couldn't believe the greatest athlete in the history of that country. But it was his grandfather's. He loved it. And we had this, just reflecting on that experience, then going to Indianapolis where he wanted to quit and go home because he didn't think he could play here, lost his confidence. To be there, and just kind of, he appreciated, I think, the fact that I stuck with him. I mean, I actually basically had to tell him he wanted to go home.
Yeah.
He didn't think he could play. And I talked him into staying, and he just appreciated it. And some guys do appreciate it. I remember another player about to get his $6-7 million payday, and looking at we call it a SPAC. It's a standard player agent contract. It's standard what we sign with the players, except for our fees and addendum related to marketing and things. And I remember the player looking at it. He's about to sign it. He looks up and, nah, you've done too much for me. And he signed, So there's just that, I think it's hard for a player who's made maybe a couple seasons at 80,000, then he got a $400,000 or $500,000, $800,000 deal. Now he's going to 8, and he's going to pay someone $300,000. It's hard for them, and it's hard sometimes to justify it. We'll have this discussion at one point. What does an agent do for you for $340,000? He should be doing more than a contract and coming to buy dinner.
Right.
He should go and help you with a contract and buy your restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's where, but there is lots of other elements to it. And, there's the advice element that an agent can give you about life and different things like that. And then, and then it's just more so, they look and say, hey, if I'm making this much money, it's worth to have an agent who does all the negotiating, all the calls, because sometimes you probably don't know how many hours you spend negotiating. Some are easier, some are longer, lots of different things like that. And then also, where did you come out? when would you ever speak to a team on your player's behalf when it comes to ice time or usage? Like, did you always encourage the player to do it first? Because, I know some agents do it. What was your plan of attack when it came to a player, who was upset in the situation they were in?
Well, you never want to approach it antagonistically. Usually what will happen is, if I haven't talked to the player, but I'm seeing his ice time cut and I'm just curious, I'll call just to ask questions. So what's going on? Because sometimes you get something like, well, he's got just a slight groin pull and we don't want to, we're trying to cut it. Oh, okay. Well, now I call the player and how's your groin pull, right? And so you never want to be.
So you would call the GM before the player?
Well, it depends on the situation.
Okay.
Quite often the player's calling me, right? Can't figure out what's going on, don't understand it. So usually I will encourage them to speak to the coaches themselves. Well, I'll maybe doing a little reconnaissance in the background. Hey, what do you think, Jason, if you're the general manager?
Right.
And then, but what I found that works really effectively, and we do this through our goal setting program, is having players sit down, get very clear with their own coaches. Because sometimes, I remember Yak Trennan, and we're going to have Renat Mamashev, who works with me on Yak, come in. And a while back, Yak, this is like 3 years ago, Yak's in the press box. I said, Yak, you got to get clear. He says, he wants me to be more physical. And I said, well, we need you to get a clear understanding of exactly what he wants, and we need it to be measurable. So I gave him a little bit of advice. He goes in and sees the coach, and coach says, really, Yak, all I really want you to do is get me 2 or 3 big hits early in the game, because we're a small team, and we need a little bit of presence there. And, Yak comes out of that meeting like,
oh, I can do that.
That's it?
Yeah.
I said, that's why I wanted you to ask 3 weeks ago before he started sitting you. And, of course, now the player comes in. Coach sees that he's engaged and he cares. He wants to understand what's needed. So he puts him in, right? Because how do you not put him in after he's shown that level of interest and he's trying to get a handle on what you as a coach want? So he gives him a try. Yak goes out and does it. And he ends up with a $2 million deal at the end of the year. And this year he's making $4 million. And maybe none of that happens if he doesn't approach the coach. So you want to get them engaged. But what I try and do with the players, and I don't know other agents that do this, most players, if you ask them what their coach wants, they're not sure, which is mind-boggling to me.
Right.
So what we try and do is get in the middle of that and make sure we get some clear goals that are measurable, because it very often accelerates, because we're all biased. So Marty Straka was too small, according to Doug McLean in Florida, who played him on the fourth line 8 minutes. A year later, he gets 95 points. How's that possible? Well, it's possible because somebody who's the coach in the National Hockey League is deemed to have a vast amount of experience making these types of decisions, was biased, made a mistake. As a result, that player, Marty, could have gone back home, right? If after that season, they bought him out. They actually gave him $500,000 to go home, and he got 95 points a year later, signed a $16 million deal. So it's helping to break down the communication barrier, which in some cases, and we have some tools to accelerate this, helps the coach maybe to see your player differently. Oh, I didn't really know. Like sometimes you'll get something, as mind-boggling it is, one NHL coach actually said to one of my clients who's making $3 million a year, who's a very good middle six forward, they pick him up in the expansion draft. The coach's first words to him are, I don't really understand your game. Can you kind of explain it to me? And like, what? What does the player say? Well, I'm a first line power play guy. I usually play 35 minutes a night, less if there's less. What do you say to that? And sometimes it's surprising.
Now, was the coach just trying to ruffle his feathers to see, or did the coach truly not?
He truly had no idea what.
So now, did that relationship get better?
No, the player asked for a trade.
I was just going to say.
And he ended up in a spot where he's doing extremely well right now.
Yeah.
To the disadvantage of that coach, his team. I don't get it. But we see this more often than you think. There's this tendency to think that the best coaches or the best will be in the NHL. And the fact is, players will tell you the best coach I had was in Pee Wee. That doctor, that business guy, that plumber who just loved the game and studied the game and motivated us in a way. I just love playing for him. And very seldom will you hear players saying the best coach I ever had. Sometimes, but very seldom is it to get their NHL coaches, which is bizarre.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. It's probably, it's a little bit different when you're young and, hey, everything's fun and everybody makes it fun. And then you get to the NHL and now it's a business. And you know what, if you're not getting to play the minutes you want or the team doesn't have success, there's a lot of variables around it for sure. So, it's always interesting because we got a few texts to get to. 833-401-1440 in our email inbox, 833-401-1440. The process that it goes through, and like we're now 2 weeks away, just over 2 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline. And I'm sure, Rich, you've had players on both sides, guys that are comfortable, because even if you're on a team, like some players, oh, geez, my guy might be getting traded. So that's one element. But then the other element is you're on a team that's like, okay, they're going to add. And one of your clients is like, well, I might get pushed down the lineup. Exactly. Right. And so how do you approach that? Because I think we only ever think about, oh, they're getting this guy and everybody's happy. Well, they're not always happy, because if you bring in a player to be a top 6 guy, well, one of your current top 6 guys is now getting knocked out of the top 6. Or if it's a third line, that guy's getting knocked out of the third line. Like, it does impact it. So how do you deal with that? I'm guessing there's more there that's like just the mental coach than being an actual agent.
Yeah, it's and then you just, a lot of people don't realize. So the trades get deadlines going on. One of my clients just announced to me last night that they're having a baby, but they had some genetic tests, and the genetic tests initially showed there could be some issues, and then they had to have some more genetic tests and found out, well, the combination of his genetics and her genetics probably made it a very limited issue, while at the same time he's not playing as much as he wants. So a lot of people don't realize that we're dealing with, young men becoming fathers, getting married, having their own struggles, and then on top of it, he's not playing much. And so sometimes it's just a combination of just chatting with him. This particular player, because of the Toronto airport issue, he went to the airport. Flight was supposed to be around, but he's got to be at practice, 15 hours away the next morning. So he was calling me from the car they rented to drive to where they were headed. And, just a lot of people don't think somebody's going to say, I'm sure, boy, that guy didn't look like he had it together at practice today. Geez, after that break, well, no one will know that he drove, 18, because I don't know how they figured this out. They're going to stop about 4 hours away and take the rental car back so that they can just take a limo the rest of the way, because he needs some sleep for practice. And so there's so many things going on in the background. And then at the same time, maybe he's fortunately, he never reads a newspaper. And most of the stories you hear are just a bunch of gibberish. It's some guy who thinks that player should be traded and could be and then makes up 6 pieces that could work. You're reading the newspapers, got a problem. But thank goodness, most of my players, they don't know how to read the sports pages. Thank goodness. Because that becomes...
Well, nowadays, social media, it's out there all the
way.
Well,
I always tell people, like, what do you think? I heard about this trade. I said, I'll tell you what, when the trade is actually happening, talk about it, because of all the trades that are talked about or will be talked about this
5%.
week, if it's 5%, it's probably a little closer to half of 1%.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know lots of players who turn off their social media during the season and just take it off their phone. They remove the app and then you can't find it. I guess if you want to go crazy at home, you can. Like, they don't necessarily get rid of their account; they just get rid of it off their phone, and then you have less urge to want to splurge and look at it, right? And
I think. Yeah, most of them try to ignore. It's funny, I had to talk with a player today. We got him an endorsement deal and they wanted to do a couple posts. And he says, Rich, I'm not really that guy. Can we do something different? It's funny how they've got guys who haven't even got an Instagram account. And quite frankly, if I had it my way, I would, recommend that they have none of that stuff. Or if you do, follow. For me, I have an Instagram account, but I follow my clients and my kids. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
I don't care about it. I don't care what else happens.
Yeah. And that's fair. I think for the mental well-being for a player, no question. I think that's something that's important. Now, some guys, though, are very engaged and they like to know what's going on. So you have to, just like your kids, you can't just have you have certain rules that you have for your children that you want to be even for everybody. But some kids some kids going to be more outgoing. Some kids going to be more quiet, right? Some's going to be more artistic. Some are going to be more analytic. And so I'm sure you have that you can't just have a one size fits all for all of your clients. When you have an outspoken client, is it easier because you're just like, hey, we can do more things. This guy wants to do, public appearances. Maybe they want to do, because some guys are just like, I'm just here to play hockey. I don't need to make the extra 50 grand. I don't really care.
Yeah, I would prefer guys not want to do anything, because the marketing deals, there's a lot of work that comes with getting them organized. Oh, that's Tuesday, I forgot. But I think the funny thing, it never amazes me. Quite often when I'm trying to get a hold of a player, I won't, but it's important enough. I want to address it or introduce the issue I'm dealing with to him on game day. I don't like to bother him on game day. It depends on the player. Some guys, you could bother them, like 5 minutes before the game, but I can't even tell you how much. So I've developed a practice where I generally will send a text during the game. thinking, okay, we'll take a look at it. They're wired. They can't go to sleep right away. He'll get back to me before he goes to sleep. And it astonishes me how many guys get back to me between the first and the second period.
They're looking at their phones?
It's unbelievable to me. Yeah.
Come on.
It beats going out for a smoke like Mary Lemieux used to do. But I just go like, okay, that's serious.
Now, have you ever asked him, like, what are you checking your phone for in the intermission?
Hey, we all do it, he says.
Really?
Yeah. Well, what are you going to do? Like, I mean, they probably I'm assuming they got it in their stall, or they wander into the,
because I look at the orders. The orders have they have their dressing room.
Yeah, and then they have the locker room.
Yeah, but then they have the other area. Like, you'd have to take your skates off and everything. And I know lots of guys do. Like, some guys get undressed and ride the bike in intermission. It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's different.
Everybody's different, but it's just, and I think the always thing that used to surprise me, right, is like when you're sitting in row 4 and you can see you got to sit in row 4, Jason. The guys will tell you that it's unbelievable that low, but you forget they can also see you. I remember one time, I never sit in row 1, but one of my buddies has row 1 tickets, not bad seats, right in the corner, so you can sort of see the whole ice.
Yep.
And when my player says afterwards, "Who's that girl you're sitting next to?" It's like, you saw that, Vinny? It's like, well, yeah, like he's literally, a foot away from me, and he just happens to catch. There's my agent.
Yeah.
Oh wow, who's he sitting with?
Oh yeah, you see it in.
I guess Taken used to wave to his kids, between shifts and stuff. It's just like we forget that there is a two-way dynamic here.
Both ways.
It's fine.
When we return, our guest today is Renat Mamashev. Of course, played in the KHL for a long time. He's a dual certified NHL and KHL agent, which is rare. Not everybody, like, you got to get certified by both, right? He was a defenseman of the year in the KHL, and now he represents lots of guys who are going over there. We're going to talk about kind of the pros and cons right now, because especially the whole political climate. They're in a country at war, for goodness sakes, against Ukraine. So we'll talk about all that with Renat next on The Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. It's the Business of Sports with Rich Winter. Welcome back. Jason Gregor, Rich Winter with you, the Business of Sports on Sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, Facebook, and X. We always kind of dive into the business side. And today, our guest, he's a former KHL Defenseman of the Year. He also was the sports director for a KHL club. He has 3 degrees sports business from the New York University, economics from the Financial University under the government of Russian Federation, and sports training from the Russian State University of Physical Education, Sport, Youth, and Tourism. Now lives in Brooklyn and is a dual certified NHL and KHL agent. Renat Mamashev joins us. Renat, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
All good. Hi, Jason. Hi, Rich.
Hey, how you doing, Renat?
Well, Renat, quite a scholar. It's a lot of degrees you got there. Did you do them all after playing, or did you take some of them while you were playing?
I took some while I was playing, and I studied at New York University after I done.
Okay. Now you're a dual certified, so you can work in both leagues, which is rare. Not a lot of agents do it. You got to apply and everything. I do want to talk about, the KHL right now, and in Russia, of course, for lots of the North American clients that you bring over there. And obviously right now they're a country that it's at war with Ukraine. Now, most of the war is being fought in Ukraine, not in Russia, but still, how do you kind of take us through the pros and the cons for Canadians or North American players when they go to the KHL? Let's start with the pros in your eyes for a lot of these players.
I mean, the competition level, the level of the game is pretty high. I think it's one of the highest, maybe behind NHL. The league is really competitive, and to succeed in that league, you have to perform really. So it's really good talented guys playing there. So that's the one pros. I would say the second one is obviously money is still good. Import players can make way more than what they can make playing in AHL or anywhere in Europe, and also the cost of living is much favorable for North American players, considering rent, food, etc. So your take home would be much greater if you play anywhere in North America or Europe outside of NHL.
Now, some of the cons, is it true right now? Like if you sign in the KHL, you can't play in other Europe leagues. Is that true? Or is that a myth?
I mean, there's yeah, I think you cannot play somewhere like in Sweden, Finland, and Czech Republic, but guys still find jobs in Germany, Switzerland, Slovakia,
Okay.
those leagues.
But it is a big decision for a player to make if he, depending on his age, if he's 26, 27, Renat, it's a like a call we had the other day. It's a little nervous to sort of close the doors to Sweden and Finland, which are really the better leagues to play outside of the KHL. Swiss is hard because they really like highly skilled players. That doesn't fit every player profile, but it's a big commitment to make. But especially you don't know. Like if I'm 26 and I have a bad year in the KHL, right, Renat, I might be done there, and then I'm got some doors closed. So that's a challenge they have to overcome, right?
Yes, but still, several guys who went to KHL who say mid-season didn't perform well and their contract being terminated, they still found jobs in Germany, and some guys found the jobs actually in Switzerland too. So
right, yeah, Switzerland's another place, but it's it's just there is some risk to it. But I think what surprises me, Renat, is talking to some of our players. Like we have a young man who's there with he went there this year with his 2 children and a pregnant wife. And I think one of the challenges we have, Renat, in talking to these players is getting the message to their wife that it's going to be okay, right? Like they're more nervous about what lifestyle will be like in Russia with the family. And I think they're generally surprised at how good and quality the life is. The restaurants are terrific. The accommodations are great. And I have to admit, I was a little surprised that this player's wife, who had a baby in Russia, felt it was as good a birthing experience as she's had, and the facilities, in her opinion, were much better there than they were with the 2 babies she had in Alberta. So it's just interesting that it's not like we think it is. I've seen some of those videos, like you sent me the one for Chelyabinsk when Dylan Secure went over there, and I'm like looking at this video going, geez, I would like to play there. And that's not even a great city, right, Renat? That was like one of the very average cities, but it's very professional. The teams run like NHL teams, It's fun.
Yeah, a lot of teams are run like as NHL teams. The infrastructure, the rinks, they upgrading the facilities, training facilities. They install all those terrific training gears and etc. And then they treat players really well. And I don't know why wouldn't you, like the conversation I have with the players, and they were saying like, oh, we should have come earlier.
Yeah, that's generally true.
Now, has it changed? Because, I talked to some players that went over there, 10, 15 years ago. And, there's some stories of guys never got paid and, they're just cut and different things like that. Was that true at that time? Because I know you played, you were defenseman of the year 12 years ago. And so you obviously played at that time. Has it improved a lot from 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah, it's improved dramatically. Like now it's more secure in terms of a contract, in terms of payments. The most challenge what could happen is just payment could be delayed. Like sometimes you wouldn't necessarily receive payment on, let's say, 15th. It could be like a week delayed, but as long as you know about it, you're generally fine. But the rest, the money, always going to be paid to the players.
Now you get paid in rubles, right, Renat? So one of the issues that is just with currency fluctuation, right? Like right now, one player was telling us the other day that, well, with the ruble bouncing back, I'm making way more than I thought I would make. So can be an issue, but it's no different than making American dollars as compared to the Canadian dollar. But the ruble's fluctuates a lot lately, right? And that's just something the players have to deal with.
Yeah, it's based on the political risks, and and then also challenging to transfer money to back home, but it's also kind of doable. So it's just a little hurdle, but it's not something that.
But you talk to parents, like I've had parents go to visit players in Moscow, and they just love the city. It's a terrific spot. And the thing that we forget that's really important to the players, Renat, is how many teams within, say, an hour of Moscow? 6, 7?
Maybe 5 in total.
Okay, so those 5 teams mean you're home every night, right?
Yeah.
So you're home with your kids. You get to have breakfast with them most of the morning. So it's a pretty good lifestyle. And in fact, I have one player that has been offered a one-way contract by an NHL team, and he's been bouncing up and down. Of course, they send him down when there's the break because they have to manage their cap. And he just said to me, like, I mean, I'm 31. I don't care anymore. I want to come home and see my kids. And so because this season he's spending a little time down, a little time up, got the place down. Then he got thinking he was going to be there quite a bit of the season because he had a two-way with a modest guarantee. Now he's called up for 4 weeks, so he's not seeing his kids. So he's thinking, gee, if you can get me a job in Switzerland, Germany, I don't care anymore. Like the money's not that important. Now the flip side of that is people wonder why players go to Russia. Well, that 31-year-old young man who's got 3 children, who's maybe put a few $100,000 away because he's played in the American Hockey League, he really doesn't have a choice but to go. He spends 2 or 3 years in Russia, he'll end up with, a couple of $1 million banked, which he actually wants, but more importantly needs.
Renat, what is the average KHL player salary right now?
I mean, again, it's based on the currency fluctuation,
right?
But I would say around 500K.
500K American, US. Okay.
Yeah.
And the average term of contracts, like, do you find, like, are there guys signing for longer than 5 years, or is it more 2 and 3 year deals?
It's more of a 1-2 year deals.
Okay. And then when it's a 1 year, are they like, is free agency the same? Like, is there a certain age until you're an unrestricted free agent, or if you sign a 1 year deal, you're a free agent the next year? How does it work?
Yeah, well, it's a little different than in NHL. Free agency, unrestricted free agency starts when player turns 29.
Okay.
Or if he's 28 and played more than 250 games in KHL.
Okay. So lots of guys could be 28. That's like, that's not that bad. It's like 5-6 years, and then you could get to the 280 and away you go. Renat Mamashev joins us. He's an NHL and KHL certified agent based out of Brooklyn. With the, the war that's going on right now with the Ukraine, Renat, have you found it? Is it more challenging? Are a lot more North Americans and maybe even European players shying away from playing in the KHL? What's the response been?
Yeah, it's just generally Scandinavians guys are kind of shy, I'd say, because they've been under a lot of pressure.
Right.
But still, we have like 3 Sweden players playing in KHL. But yeah, mostly North Americans are coming over.
And the change you mentioned, how the league is a lot more secure. What about the travel? Right, like I'd heard, many years ago, the planes weren't necessarily the safest. Now, this is from some guys that played North America. Maybe they were spoiled from what they flew in the NHL. But a lot of guys said, "Man, like I was white knuckling it a lot." As an agent, have you, and it's a former player, like have all of those elements of the league improved?
Yeah, like the all flying charter planes, and like majority of the teams they do. And also if you play in Moscow region, you don't really have to fly a lot. You just travel by bus, so it's really within 1-2 hours drive.
Oh, so they bus to the like now it's an hour ride. They just take a bus.
So but overall, it improved dramatically, and especially good hotels in every 4 or 5 stars hotels in every city basically. And teams are flying like private planes.
So if you mentioned North Americans coming to the KHL, what about the Russian players you represent and guys that play in the KHL to come to the NHL? Is it harder? Is it easier right now with the political landscape to get players to come to North America, or is that kind of non-existent for your client?
I think it's non-existent. Like as long as contract is up in KHL, player can join the team in NHL if he's drafted. If he's really good and undrafted, they can. It depends on the player.
You mentioned the Scandinavian, the Nordic countries, and I understand obviously that's a pretty it's a pretty sensitive topic for them, and it's one that impacts it. But like overall, for you, you live in Brooklyn, and so you represent it. is it difficult? Like, do you have to go back to Russia as an agent normally to kind of to fully kind of grasp what your players are going through? Like, do you go once a month, every 2 months after work?
Absolutely, yeah. I go like once in a while. Yes, I'm going like several times throughout the season and off season as well. So, and it's just challenging to get there. Well, because it's no direct flight from North America to Russia. You have to go through some third country, like Turkey or
gone are the Manhattan to Moscow direct flights. Renat will be very happy if this war gets settled and they reinstate them.
Yeah, that would be great.
So, when you look at kind of like the junior leagues in Russia, Renat, and I know Ritch has talked about, hey, that's where you're looking for new clients sometimes. How's the Russian developed system right now for the younger players? Because I know some of the great ones can, they're playing in the KHL when they're 17 and 16. But how are the junior leagues in Russia right now?
I think they're doing well. I think there is a lot of teams, and there is like the problem, I guess, with the teams, the Moscow region teams, the very like rich teams, they kind of attract more talent at the very early age, and they recruit them. But the problem is to developing them and into like they don't have enough spots in their KHL system, in the KHL team. Therefore, some guys get kind of lost, and sometimes it's challenging for KHL teams to let go of the young talent to play. There's they can rent players to other teams.
Yeah,
but it's still kind of, some teams do that, some teams don't, and it's like for the other teams, like, why would we rent player from you, then he plays for us, and then we develop him and he goes back and playing for you. So there's a lot of kind of these situations.
No, good.
Well, Renat, we really appreciate your time today. Continued success. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jason.
Hey, Renat, have a good night.
That's Renat Mamashev. It's interesting, and there's obviously the moral. You're going to have some players who are like, dude, I'm not playing in Russia.
Yeah.
And like you think of how Putin runs that country. It's not it's not going to be for everybody. There's no question about it, right? And
the thing is, it would if they got there, because quite frankly, it is, as and it's funny, like they talk about American companies dealing with leaving. The fact is they don't leave. Like outside of the McDonald's, a few of them, what they do is they set up a subsidiary in Panama, then they change the name, and they're all still there. So the country's operating pretty much normally. I mean, normally by their standards, it's a dictatorship, but at the end of the day, it doesn't affect most people. And the people are good people. They love the game.
Oh, yeah. You have a lunatic at the top. Doesn't mean that everybody below him is a lunatic, but he's still like the fact that they're invading another country. I just wonder how some people, I can see how, a lot of Ukrainian people like, what the hell are you doing? Right. And it's interesting. Just when I was looking at the league, trying to ignore the political part of it, just like how the league has managed to get stronger during this time. And, who owns the league, right? Like is it single? I don't even know. Is it a single entity that runs the whole league still?
No,
or is it
they have individual
owners?
It's still the oligarchs seem to be involved, but it's not always clear, right? Who owns the team? It's not the kind of disclosure that we get here, but look, it
like what would happen? Cause he mentioned how, you get a delay in your payment.
Yeah.
Let's say the delay is 2 weeks and 3 weeks. Yeah. Like, what do you do? Have you like what do you do as an agent at that point? Like, how can you force them to pay a client?
Well, I just call 1-800-RENAT, and Renat takes care of it. Usually it's explainable. A sponsor didn't pay on time. They're waiting for it. Renat would confirm that with the sponsor. You find, okay, there's no risk. But we've not had anybody unpaid for, the last 5-10 years. I don't remember anybody.
But earlier on, like 15 years ago, it was fairly common, was it not?
Fairly is too strong, but it usually came with the guy who got the big salary and didn't deliver, because now everybody's on the hot seat. So
right.
guys that get screwed, and then they.
And
try
so what would
settle.
happen at that point? Like you would like, let's say a guy was, he was due to get $1 million just because it's a round number. It's easy for anybody. So he's due to get $1 million. He's, it's split up in 13 payments, whatever it is, right? It's like close to, 85 grand a payment. And all of a sudden the payments stop coming.
There's an arbitration provision, just like here in the NHL. And those things get taken.
But did
care
they
of.
get their money back eventually or
Well,
no?
back then there wasn't the same system that's in
Right.
place now. Now it very much mirrors what the NHL does. They have salary cap.
Right.
People don't realize that, and certain things don't count against the salary cap. So they have a little bit of flexibility, and they're still, don't worry, they'll get it to you under something that looks like a table, maybe.
Yeah. And now because we have some, when they say tax free, it's not like someone's got to pay the tax. Who pays the tax? Is it the teams?
Well, it varies by country. In Russia, you pay 15% tax. And then when you come home, you can deduct that off the tax you'd otherwise paid. Now, if you're a Canadian, it's easier to reorganize your affairs if you don't have a home here and become a Russian resident. Now, if you're a Russian resident, then you're only paying 15% tax. Now, the guy with a home here and a vacation home has trouble getting over the residence test in terms of where he pays his taxes. But in places like Switzerland and Sweden and Finland, when they say tax-free, they go out and pay the taxes. So
The team does.
You're basically negotiating an after-tax deal. Right?
Okay.
So they go and pay it. And then there's all kinds of rules around the taxation of foreigners where things like a player will be asked, well, we don't want you here until September 1st, because in that particular country, the lower tax rate applies for someone that's only there for 9 months or for 6 months. So they try and at their end work it as best that they can. They'll give you a signing bonus instead of your 2 months salary for July and August and have you come in September. But basically when a guy goes to Switzerland and if his deal's 250, that's what he gets in his jeans. They cover his house, they cover his car. Now the problem is you go up for dinner for $3 and it's like $600 for pizza. But it's a very expensive place to live. But,
okay.
But it's a beautiful place to live. So, I mean, that's the gem of Europe. Everybody wants to play in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And but they're very specific. Like it's a puck possession. I talked to Derek Ryan about it because he played there for a bit, and it's very different. Like in Sweden, he's like in Sweden, the greatest game is a 1-0 game.
Yeah,
right. Like
yeah.
that's how they view. Where in Switzerland, they want, like 6-3, 6-4. They really promote offense and they look for, I don't care if you're physical. Do you have skill? Can you think the game? Can you make plays? And they search for those guys. So basically when we say, okay, it gets this after tax, somebody's paying the tax in those countries. And basically if you're making 250, it's kind of like you'd be making 500 grand in North America, because after tax, you're taking home about 250, give or take.
Yeah. And keep in mind, you're not also paying for your apartment in
Right.
Hartford or other kinds of things. And surprisingly enough, some of the cities over there are a little bit nicer than Bridgeport. So we forget. And this is the other thing that people don't realize.
Like playing in Sweden and Switzerland and Germany, like there's,
awesome.
If you're an American League player, and I get you want the dream of the NHL, but one of your clients, Mark Giordano, left for a year, came back, had a really good career. Sometimes, it's about opportunity. Derek Ryan's another guy who went over there for a few years. Now, he wasn't in the NHL first, but he went over there and still got looked at. Like, they're still watching nowadays, right? Like, the scouts are paying attention. And if you're a good player, you could say, man, rather than sign a two-way deal, I'm going to go over there for 2 years, play confident. Like, my odds probably, I don't know if you've tracked it or not, Rich, but for the guys who are, not the obvious ones, not the McDavids, not the Drysaddles, but the other ones are like, you know what? They need a few things to happen. They've probably got a good chance if you develop, but not a guaranteed chance. Is it better to go to Europe now?
It's so individual. Like Gio, when he went, there's a variety of reasons. Mike Keenan was coming in as coach, so you never know if Mike's going to fall in love with you and play you 35 minutes or play you 3 minutes in 3 games. So there's a lot of risk. That frustrated Gio. Gio felt he wanted to play and needed to play. There was a coach in Moscow Dynamo at the time, was very good at working with defensemen, promised him 25, 30 minutes a night, which he got. The lateral movement that he began to flourish at because of the larger ice surface really helped him when he came back. And, I think psychologically, he would say standing up to Daryl Sutter and standing his ground and standing and believing in himself made a bit of a psychological shift. So when you package that all together, you start thinking, and he was offered, he was making over $1 million at that time, and he played in the minors. Remember, he started on a 3-way contract where he was
the whole 3-ways.
And he had his guaranteed salary was $15,000. So when the Russians came calling with, over $1 million,
and that was 2005 or 6,
generally
right?
tax free. You look at it, you're from a family, a modestly successful family. Dad works hard. And you're going to put $1 million at 22 years of age in your pocket. So that million, the opportunity, it all came together to be something valuable. And he'll say, you've said it on After Hours over the years. He said it many, many times. He says, if he wouldn't have gone there, he would never won a Norris Trophy. So he learned things there that helped him adapt his game. And I don't think, when he came back, Daryl Sutter, who I love, he said, I'm never going to pay you more than I've offered. Never going to pay you more than I've offered. Not a nickel more. So don't go thinking you're going to get, well, his guaranteed money on the last offer was like $300,000. And then they gave him one way at 1.3. And I think that gave Gio the sense of, I can stand up. I can take a position.
Right.
And you know what? He went into that room and everybody in that room know he kicked someone's back end. And I think that gave him the confidence. And I think to some degree that might have been the day he became the future captain, because he was able to stand up for himself. He got a better sense of faith in his own ability. So, I mean, all of those things come into play. Now, other players, they go for different reasons and it can help. But I think you're 25 plus.
Yeah.
It's hard for you to make the comeback. You go over 22, 23, you're still a kid. So I think they look at you, but there's not that many. A lot of Russians will come and develop late. That seems normal, right, to the scout. So that happens, but not many Canadians go to the KHL and come back.
Rich winner Jason Gregor with you. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back in the business of sports 1440, Oilers Nation, YouTube, Facebook, and X, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. Do you always like to get to a few questions? Because there's always some questions fans are interested about different things. This one from Jim asks about, Rich, for the player insurance, who pays for it, the deductible, what does it cover, how much is it, who underwrites it?
Well, there's two priorities to play for it. The teams will pay to ensure long-term contracts. So if a guy's injured, they get their money back. Usually there's a deductible like most insurance policies. Sometimes it's 3-4 months salary. It depends on the deal. And they usually get for a package of contracts that they have, so they get a little better deal. From a player's perspective, there's two types of insurance. There's 24-hour, which covers any injury anywhere. Now, if you've got 1 year left on your deal, you've got nowhere near enough money to be comfortable for the rest of your life, you'll buy 24-hour insurance, pay for it yourself. It's pretty expensive, but if a career-ending injury happens, you're covered.
Like what's 24-hour insurance? So let's say on $1 million contract, what would it be?
I'm guessing it'd be like $25,000 maybe.
Okay, so that's for 1 year.
For 1 year, and
Okay.
then they have deals if you buy a 3-year policy and stuff. But then there's now the contracts are guaranteed, true, but they're not guaranteed unless you're playing with the team, practicing with the team, or traveling with the team. So if a player has a long-term contract, he'll buy off-ice coverage, which will cover him from a car accident while he's away from the rink. It'll cover him for slipping and falling in the house. It'll cover him for getting in a car accident that wasn't his fault. So there's basically two types of insurances that players buy and one that the team buys. So it's expensive, but I've had a lot of players, have career-ending injuries and pretty valuable for them at that point.
Yeah. And is that something that's kind of like just a standard when Paul Smith just comes in, he's a new client of mine, he signs a contract. It's like, okay, Paul, you got your contract. Now here's the insurance you're going to need.
Well, we recommend it. And
Right.
Generally players will follow. And when pedal hits the metal, I like to talk to the wives because they have a longer term perspective. I mean, the reason these athletes are good is because they can see in a millimeter things that are just a blur to us. They're focused in the immediate to such an extent.
Yeah.
Talking to them, I'm not going to get hurt. Long term, don't worry about that. Talk about mom who's home breastfeeding the third child and realize the money's not as substantial in the bank account as hubby thinks. And so she has an impact on that. And, we just try to make sure they're covered because I remember one time, I don't know if you remember the defenseman Milos Holan.
No.
So Milos played for the Ducks, played for Philadelphia, didn't play a lot, and then he got leukemia.
Oh,
And,
okay. Yes.
Yeah, and I remember Cindy and I went to visit Milos. He'd probably lost 85 pounds. He's 130 some pounds. He is sitting there with his pregnant wife. He managed to get her pregnant before he got the treatment, which was positive. And at the end of the day, he pulled me close to him and just said, thanks, with tears in his eyes. And I knew what he's talking about, but he went on to say, if you made me buy this coverage.
Yeah.
And he said, I just know I don't have to take care of them. I don't have to take care of them. So it's like fire insurance. You don't need it unless your house burns down. But when it does, ask people in Pacific Palisades how valuable it was for the few of them that had it. So it's a push, but I've had probably a half dozen guys collect their insurance policy. It's kept them busy. Now, the funny thing about Milos, because I told him it's a good thing you got pregnant before you got the all the chemotherapy. He says, "Oh, not my sperm, man. My sperm is never going to be stopped by anything." So sure enough, he called me. It was probably about 6 or 7 years later and announced that they're pregnant with twins.
Oh, wow.
He says, "I told you, doctors know nothing." I'm Milos Holland, so that was pretty funny.
Wes wonders, negotiating original 6 teams expansion franchise. There's no difference.
The big
I guess it's different GM.
Yeah,
really.
all we care about is salary cap. We don't like negotiating. Who likes negotiating with a team with no money? So if they're up against the cap, it's always a challenge. So you want to talk to Chicago, you want to talk to San Jose. You're in free agency. They may not be your first choice until you realize, we got to get a hold of Mike Greer in San Jose. There's no money left, and that was a real challenge during the flat cap after COVID. So no, I could care less who I negotiate with.
So with all of you, look at how much the cap is going to go up here the next few seasons, right? Obviously top players are going to get paid, but
no,
kind of that next tier
they're
of
not going to get paid.
You don't think so?
No, the money's going to go to the middle class.
Well,
look at all the long-term deals that people signed, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of top players at a maximum 8 million, 9 million, 10 million. They're stuck. So
Rantanen is up. Mitch Marner's up. McDavid is up next year. Right, like there's still some big
32
names.
teams, Jason.
Yeah.
Right. So what's going to happen, I think, is the middle class is going to.
That's what I was going to say. I totally agree with you. I think you're going to see a lot more, guys who are making $3 million are suddenly going to be making $5 million.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about Andrew Mangiapane, for example, who's not. They've got him slotted in on the third line. He's not given as much of opportunity on the team he's playing on now. But if he ends up with 15, 20 goals, the way he plays, tenacious defense, his commitment to the 200-foot game, and his energy, he'll be fine because there's not that many Andrew Mangiapanes. There might be no Connor McDavids because I'm sure the Oilers will work hard to get that done. That's the other problem. There's not going to be many of them available. Now, the teams that have the studs will pay, and then they'll be in the same problem the Oilers have been in for years, right? They'll just have to deal with it, and they'll do their best. I think you look at this year, I think Brad Treliving probably does as good a job as anybody by finding and filling some holes with very little money. That's going to be the challenge when you get a good team is how do you figure out how to 100%. Identify?
You've got to make you look at Washington and getting Strome, right? The trades they've made, right? Getting Thompson didn't cost them very much, right? Charlie Lindgren when he came in, like they've made probably 6 or 7 really good moves that didn't involve big cap hits. Now they got a little lucky because 2 veterans went on LTIR, so that opens up some space a little sooner. We got to be honest about that, but they still made some really good player acquisition, and their drafting's been phenomenal.
Well, they've got a 35-goal scorer and Andrew Mangiapane on their third line playing defense, which is a role they like him in. He's still producing for the amount of ice time he's getting, but they've now got some luxuries, right? And it's that finding those guys. I mean, Bill Belichick was the best at it in any sport, right? Finding the guy who's a cancer, finding the guy who's a problem, finding the guy that has an issue in one aspect of his game, and getting out of him what a Bill Belichick has historically done.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Next week on the Business of Sports, for all of you, we're going to have like a hockey stick segment. And I think you're going to be somewhat intrigued, maybe surprised by the business of sport when it comes to the hockey sticks. Now, we've had Adam Oates on the show many times, and Adam swears by it. We just had him. He's a very smart guy, understands the game. And, people kind of joke like he's a stickler for sticks, but he talks about it so passionately about it. He goes, think about it. How many guys like Ritch, do you golf?
Never.
But you have clients who golf.
Oh, yeah. I work with PGA players. They'll go to the moon to have their sticks calibrated.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but ask NHL players who will go for a golf fitting. Have they ever went for a stick fitting?
No, and the problem
is crazy.
But here's why it's such a big problem. We'll deal with more next week, is that a high probability scoring chance in the National Hockey League is open for execution for less than 3/4 of a second on average.
Yeah.
If your stick is too long, if your lie is wrong and you can't corral the puck as effectively as you would otherwise, then you're screwed. And that's quite often, I mean, obviously there's a skill difference, but I had one young player plays with Chicago, defenseman cut 1 inch and 3/4 off his stick this year.
Yeah.
That's a lot,
crazy. Oh yeah.
Right? But I mean, what happens is I remember when Thomas Tatar was in Detroit, Mike Babcock said, hey, you Tats, use Pav's stick. because he has a big, big blade on him, and you'll control the puck. And
No.
so he made that change, and he didn't change for some period of time until we sat down, talked about it, and he realized his one-timer has been something he had relied on because the stick had too much flex and he didn't control the puck, and he just quit using it. You know, so it's mind-boggling to me. The most important tool that a player has is his hockey stick. He's got to execute quickly, and it's a unique service that we provide to our clients because they're all honestly surprised to learn that, how did I get by without it?
Yeah. Well, it's true. Like I remember Darnell Nurse talking about the stick he used for years till he, Adam Oates is like, no, we're going to get you.
Well, and
fitted
Marion
for a
Hossa
different
was the best. Like I asked players, have you had your stick calibrated? Everybody says no until I ask Marion. He says, well, I've had some engineers look at it. And what I've chosen to do is I use a shorter stick in the second period than I do in the first, and a little shorter in the third than I do in the second. Because over the course of the game, my body does get a little bit tired. My posture changes slightly. And I'm thinking like, okay, this guy might be the most complete player I've ever seen. I think he's the best forward that ever played in the game as a package, not the best offensive player, but certainly one of the very best. No surprise. And it's no surprise he took his grandma's pierogies recipe. We'll have him on the show at one point and have him explain how the last 4 years of his tenure in Chicago, he took his grandma's pierogi recipe, got it manufactured, and turned it into a company he now owns and controls as CEO, the largest food distributor in Slovakia. So there's some pretty interesting.
Just off of pierogies? No,
they're not.
They got more, but
they're not.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
Good start. Rich, great stuff, man. We'll chat with you next Wednesday.
You bet.
That is Rich Winter joins us every Wednesday in the business of sports. If you like hockey sticks, you want to like next week.